Hi everybody, Michael Anderson with Etail Solutions. Thanks for joining me for part 3 of Distributed Logistics for Digital Commerce. Today we are going to cover the concept behind master SKU management. Now this is a foundational topic. Matter of fact, none of the other topics that we've either talked about already in session 1 or session 2 or the future sessions really even matter if you can't figure this one out and nail it. This has everything to do with data integrity. It has everything to do with the ability to automate and to scale. And so it's a very, very important topic that we're going to cover. Now, if you happen to miss the prior sessions where we kind of reviewed digital commerce channels, where we reviewed the different sort of endpoints where you might have inventory across a distributed network of supply, I encourage you to go back and take a look at those, review the 5 touch points. But at this point, I'm going to assume that you've seen those, and we're going to move ahead with the topic. So today, let's start by thinking of the concept of a hub and a spoke. All right, distributed logistics is about being able to connect your sales channels on one side or your digital channels on one side, your demand channels really, with your supply. So I want you to think about a hub and a spoke type of a model. What we're going to review is coming in from the end of the spoke into the hub where everything is normalized. In other words, this is where you can control all of your settings and manage your orders and manage your inventory and all that. It's all normalized at the center. But when we're dealing with integrations, we have to start at the endpoint and bring that in and tie it all together. So the first step here is we're going to take a look at a supply channel and take a look at how that kind of gets its way to the center. So as we look at a supply channel, the first thing to understand is this could be a 3PL that's running their own WMS. This might be one of your own warehouses where you're running an ERP. It might be a dropship supplier, could be a cross-dock supplier, could be Amazon FBA, could be a retail point of sale system where you're considering inventory for buy online, pickup in store, or third-party pickup. Could be any of those or more, right? This is a source of inventory. So the first thing to deal with when you're dealing with integrations is you have to be able to communicate, right? So this is the communication layer, whether that's going to be EDI, whether that's going to be a flat file exchange via FTP, whether it's going to be an API, could even be just files being transferred via email. Whatever that looks like, there's a communication layer that we've got to deal with, and chances are better than not that every single one of those endpoints has a different communication layer or they do things differently in this layer. But once we have that, we need to be able to do something with that data. Now, when we're talking about the content, rich content, then that's going to be tied to a taxonomy, which I think we've already covered a little bit in concept and we'll probably discuss more in future sessions. When we're talking about price and availability, it might be a simple 2-column file, orders and so forth. All of that content or the data has to be mapped regardless of which feed we're trying to service at the time. To start out with, though, we have to understand what products we're even talking about. So this is the unique identifiers, the UPCs, the GTINs, the ISBNs, EANs, etc. Then we need to be able to understand this supply channel. When they talk to us about a quantity, how do we know what unit of measure that means, right? They could give us a quantity of 50, but if that's 50 6-packs and not 50 eaches, that's an entirely different thing. So you've got to have that unit of measure conversion and schedule. You've got to be able to understand what are the stock levels and what does the cost or what is the cost of this product at this particular supply channel. We're going to talk about multiple supply channels in just a moment, and you'll see how that's significant. Weights and DIMs. Eventually, we're going to take orders and we're going to want to fulfill inventory out of this location and ship orders. So we need to understand what are the weights, what are the dimensions, so that we can calculate shipping and so forth. What are the primary attributes? You know, a basic description, a title, and maybe some other simple information that we're going to manage at that SKU level. And then what are the secondary attributes? What are the things that are more detailed and might have more to do with the category that you're in? And so forth. What sort of data do we need to be able to track? And that's going to be all tied to the taxonomy of that supply channel. And then images. Obviously, that's going to be a major component of being able to ultimately publish on the other side of the equation to demand channels. So you need to be able to have some image management. Now, there are some more things. I'm going to stay at this level for now. There's more that has to be managed and sort of configured, but I think for now, this is going to handle the primary concepts. So ultimately, we've got all of that content, and we've got to sort of tie that to what we've historically called like a channel record, or you might call it a channel SKU. It's what this channel calls this item. So if it's from a supplier, it might be a part code, or you might assign it its own ID. That ultimately then has to be tied to the master SKU in the base unit of measure in your core, in your hub, if you want to think of it that way, or your core application that is going to be your system of record / your source of truth. Critical component right there. Okay, that's what allows all the communication for the transactions and any publishing or any data that's got to move back and forth between these two endpoints. That's what allows that to happen. Okay. So let's take a look at that when we spread that out across multiple suppliers. Now all of a sudden, we've got a scenario where we've got 3 different sources of inventory for a particular product. Now this might be different locations. It could be that you've got some supplier catalog overlap if you're a drop shipper and you're maybe going to drop ship this particular product, but you've got multiple sources of how you could buy that, which means that each and every one of these channels has got its own cost. Might have its own description, might have its own content. It's definitely got its own way of communicating, right? And that's where this concept of a channel-centric architecture becomes so critical. What we're basically talking about with a channel-centric architecture is that each and every one of these integrations can have its own communication layer, its own mapping, its own taxonomy, its own channel ID, and channel record that is going to tie back to that master SKU. But using all of that information, we can tie that back to a single master SKU. That's the component that allows distributed logistics to really occur. Okay, so that's supply side. Now let's take a quick look on the other side of the equation when we're publishing. It's just the reverse, right? We've got an ID that we're going to associate with the master SKU. You've got all of that content that's going to be associated with that sales channel and tied to that sales channel's taxonomy. And then we've got a communication layer. So for like Amazon, it's an API. You might be doing 1P with Amazon, and maybe you're using AS2 EDI. There's all sorts of different layers or communication technologies that you might use there. And then you've hit your endpoint, right? So fairly straightforward, but when you expand this and take a look at what this means, you can look at this from the perspective of I may have several different channels. I might be selling on my third-party Seller Central account on Amazon. I might have a 1P relationship directly with Walmart where it's EDI. I might have a website that I'm working with and doing wholesale drop shipping for, like a Wayfair. Or I might be gathering point of sale data or leveraging point of sale for buy online, pick up in store. So lots of different channels. But again, all of this is normalized at the center. And the master SKU management is the ability to connect to these different channels and tie it all back to that master SKU in that base unit of measure. So when you kind of zoom out a little bit, this is what you're looking at from a distributed logistics standpoint, right? You're dealing with both supply and you're dealing with your digital sales channels. Now, the result of this is it makes channel expansion way easier. You don't have to figure out how to manage inventory every single time you add a new channel. You just have to deal with that channel. Same thing on the supply side, quite frankly. You can manage all these different channels from a single source of truth and be able to control content in a central location and have that automatically mapped out and update on the various channels. It gives you complete visibility across all of your digital channels. It allows you to get a much stronger view on demand across all of your sales channels and also how you're going to fulfill that demand. So forecasting is way easier. You've got all the data at your fingertips. Now all of a sudden you can scale and use automation to run these jobs on all sides of the equation. And you've got tremendous data at your fingertips to be able to report on profitability from any number of different angles. And you've got organizational alignment around a single source of truth. And there's a lot of other benefits as well. So thank you again for joining me. Next time we are going to dig into regional inventory visibility, which will allow us to talk about programs like Seller Fulfilled Prime and Walmart 2-Day and so forth. So I hope you can join me then. Until then, stay safe.